I'm John Gormley. Welcome to this hour of the radio program, and I thank you for checking in wherever we find you, and more importantly, wherever you have made the choice to find us on this day. Well, glad to have with me Premier Brad Wall, who checks in here every month or so on a feature we call Ask the Premier. It is the ultimate in an accountability session. The Premier spends 1 full hour with us, takes your calls on any issues of concern to you as a Saskatchewan citizen. We will often traverse areas like education, healthcare, highways, infrastructure, you name it, we talk about it here. The only rule on Ask the Premier is that you get yourself involved. So any questions you have, any current issues that you are facing as a Saskatchewanian, Premier Brad Wall joins us on the phone this morning. The number is 1-877-332-8255, and that gets you directly here to Premier Wall. Mr. Premier, thank you for taking our call, and good to have you back.
Morning, John.
Let's do, now you bring a couple of follow-ups often from the segment we did earlier where a listener has a question. Do you have a couple of follow-up stories today?
We do. Alan from Welwyn had called about a concern that we've heard from that part of the province with respect to long-standing restrictions on drilling for oil and gas in the potash area. Obviously, there's safety concerns there, and those who are affected are wondering about compensation. There was a discussion we had with Alan about whether or not there was a lawsuit currently on the issue, and obviously that prevents a lot of discussion if there is. The bottom line to that, John, is there is a lawsuit that has not yet been discontinued, and so it does sort of limit the ability for us to talk, to basically have a negotiation on the radio. But I can say this, that we have the government has lifted restricted drilling for about 60 individually held properties where it was deemed to be safe to drill. So we've been looking at the area and trying to remove some parcels from the list where it's not a safety concern.
No, and obviously negotiating over the radio is tricky enough anyway, but notwithstanding there might be a lawsuit active or wherever the lawsuit is, that doesn't prevent the powers that be in government from negotiating with the landholders to resolve the lawsuit at some point.
Right, and officials were meeting with some of those folks on, as you would know, on a confidential and without prejudice basis.
Sure.
So the meetings were happening with the Rocanville PRDA committee is what it's called. But there's some additional complications that has kind of complicated the conversations itself, is the briefing that I have. But the meetings were occurring, although obviously we've not come to a resolution yet that makes the landowners happy at this point or satisfied.
All right. Good. Now you also had another point on, was it Crown, Sask Power?
On Crown land, that's right. Ken from Estevan had called in about whether or not some certain land around Rafferty was available for sale. There are parcels of land that Sask Power is going to hold on to for the purposes of Boundary Dam 3 and what happens down there in terms of of power generation. However, there's other parcels that are with the Water Security Agency, lands that are technically now or were protected under the Wildlife Habitat Protection Act. But you'll know, John, very recently, with the support of conservation and environmental groups, the Wildlife Federation, we've come to an agreement on how we can now identify lands that are truly environmentally sensitive and ought not to be for sale, and other lands that, with a caveat, could be sold, frankly, with an environmental caveat, could be sold, and then a third category of land that can just be moved in to the private sector if there's a willing buyer. And so I know the Water Security Agency, I believe they've contacted Ken to determine if, in fact, some of the land that he or others down there might be interested in developing would be part of those lists available for sale, and those discussions are ongoing.
Outstanding. Premier Brad Wall, the follow-up to our last installment a while back. Okay, I look at the list of topics I have, and we never get through them all, but we'll do the college try, and of course a lot of calls coming in, everything from highways to equalization. Oh, even to a Turks and Caicos call. So this is going to be good after yesterday's little Twitter eruption that you were...
I think we almost broke the Twitter yesterday.
I think so.
Wow.
Okay, speaking of giving things the college try, let's start with this U of S story. Transform Us, which is the campaign to reduce some university spending, rechannel it, prioritize certain programs over others. Then, of course, all of this leading to this crisis of confidence, the firing of the university president, bringing in Dr. Gordon Barnhart as the interim president. How do you see, as the main funder of this university, being the provincial government, how do you see the U of S today?
Well, of all, I think there's a great deal more stability there now that the board has chosen Dr. Gordon Barnhart to be the interim leader, the interim president, after a lot of volatility that was well documented, not just here, but of course across the country. I was concerned about reputational risk for the university. I know the minister was. I think the board was as well, and just people in general, the alumni of the university, the faculty, the students. And so now we have some steady leadership there under Dr. Barnhart as they search for a new president. I would say this, though, John, the Transform Us initiative, which the principles of which the government supports and understands. They're trying to ensure the long-term financial viability of the institution. They're looking to perhaps find some efficiencies in terms of expenditures. I can tell you that what we provided to the University of Saskatchewan this year, about $365 million, is a 65% increase from 2007 when we got elected. The operational budget for the university has increased way in excess of the inflation rate. So the funding has been there from governments. I think what the university has been trying to do here of late is to determine how, with that additional funding, there can be the financial pressures there are, and how can they ensure long-term sustainability. We need that process to continue, notwithstanding the recent issues there. And I think I heard the interim president, Dr. Barnhart, commit to that sort of long-term sustainability for the institution. But I'm very hopeful now with him at the leadership of the university, with the board committed to a process that ensures that they are still looking for efficiencies, that they are looking for long-term sustainability for the institution.
Premier Brad Wallace here. We call this Ask the Premier. Okay, Derek, you're on with the Premier the big debate on Twitter yesterday.
Good morning, gentlemen. I just had a quick question, and I know that John had talked about this a little bit earlier in the morning, but I never heard it all. But what would be the reasoning the federal government would not want to allow another province to join Canada? And
particularly what in the Caribbean?
Exactly. And I guess the second part is that is because obviously the government of Canada is not looking to do that, is I was wondering when the Premier of Saskatchewan is willing to deploy the Saskatchewan Army to take over Turks and Caicos.
Well, first of all, on the first point, I'm not sure why the federal government is not at least interested. This issue's been raised, almost once or twice a decade, it seems, in earnest, either because of interest from the Turks and Caicos, or some people in Canada are, sort of muse about it a little bit. Obviously, it's a pretty complicated matter to change the nature of the country to include, perhaps in this case, not a province, but maybe a territory, or as we were saying somewhat in jest yesterday, just we'll take them into Saskatchewan and they'll be automatically in. And our point yesterday was, if that happens, those 32,000 people there would be part of a half province, and so there wouldn't be an equalization cost for the rest of the country. And we were having a bit of fun with it. But I honestly don't know why the federal government's not more interested in the discussion. I think the UK in the past, which is currently the Turks and Caicos, TCI, are part of the United Kingdom, and so I'm not sure the interest has been there. But if the people of the Turks and Caicos, and that's the prime, I think, consideration, were interested, why wouldn't we at least have the discussion and consider it? Obviously, having Canada in the Caribbean would be a huge advantage for those Canadians that like to take a break from winter. And imagine going to a place like that. You don't have to go through customs. You don't have to change your currency. There's the maple leaf flying on the beach. I think it is worth a bit of a discussion. I don't know why, Derek, they haven't. They've sort of ruled it out of hand yesterday. 1-877-332-8255. Dallas and East End, you're on with Premier Brad Wall.
Yes, Mr. Wall. I wanted to talk to you about equalization and what's going on out east. By all signs, it looks like they're going to go back with this Liberal government they've had that is taking this province into ruin.
This is in Ontario.
Yes, and they're going to join Quebec as another basket case of the East. As a half province, and I realize we're new at that, but can we push this on equalization a bit? We agree that it was a good thing when it started, But now it's just kind of a top-me-up, and it really doesn't penalize governments that are in a financial mess of their own making. And it really looks like it's just us paying them so they can be socialist. And I realize we just come out of that boat ourselves, and I was wondering if you've talked to the other premiers of half provinces about that. It should be a small meeting. There's only like 4. And if this is going to be pushed when this comes up again, have you discussed this?
Dale, it's not with those premiers. We have not discussed it. It's something we've talked about internally, just the state of the program. And Saskatchewan should be a bit circumspect about it. I think we should, because we were major benefactors of equalization for a very long time. And so, I think it would be perhaps, I don't think we want to appear at all ungrateful or I think we want to be generous to other jurisdictions that need it. But Dallas has put his finger on a bit of a problem, John, in terms of the long-term sustainability. We were just talking about that for the university, of the equalization program, because it's a federal program, as you know, and right now I think more than half of it goes to 2 provinces, which are the most populous provinces in the country and the oldest economies. And so I think you'd have jurisdictions in Atlantic Canada who are definitely in need of some help, I would suggest, who are now looking at a capped program increasingly being taken up by larger provinces, and they're wondering about their future. Here's the final concern I'll say, John, to Dallas's point, and I would say this in a general sense, not with respect to any province. We have something called the Agreement on Internal Trade in this country, where we all agree to certain rules in terms of procurement, in terms of free trade within the provinces, that we shouldn't be unduly subsidizing industry, perhaps, or protecting our companies or our economies from procurement from other places. I think that's a concern increasingly in the West. A question as to whether that's happening. Ontario's implemented some of those preferential tendering. They call it local knowledge tendering in that province, and I think it's exacerbated by the fact that it's potentially exacerbated by provinces who might be recipients of equalization, on a de facto basis from the rest of the country who would be engaging in these things. So it's a concern. No discussions yet, but it's something certainly that's on the radar for us in Saskatchewan.
This is Ask the Premier. Premier Brad Wallace here. Lines are jammed when we get back. Calls on everything from highways to district school capital spending, moose populations out of control near highways, and more. Stand by. You have a question for Premier Brad Wall? It's here on Ask the Premier. I'm John Gormley, only on News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. This is Ask the Premier. Premier Brad Wall joins us every month or so, where he takes your calls on the radio for 1 full hour at 1-877-332-8255. Let's get back to the calls. And now there are often, when the Premier is here, localized calls, certain areas, whether education, health, infrastructure, listeners have a question on. Let's go to Tuxford and Sandra. Sandra, you have a highways question for the Premier.
Yes. Highway 202, which is the major access for Highway 2 plus as well as Highway 42 to Buffalo Pound Provincial Park, is underwater. That highway has been ignored for the last 4 years. It's been crisis management by the ministry. As the water's been collecting, they've made attempts to build up the road. We understand $700,000 and up has been spent. What's the plan to save 202?
That is a great question. Let me check into what's going on with Highway 202. In a general sense, every year we have broken the spending record last year in terms of highways budgets, and yet every year, we know there are just more and more problem areas, and so we're going to have to keep up with that investment and perhaps find some more within a balanced budget. But I will get back and report back specifically on 202, John.
All right. When we do the June show, Sandra, we will get the answer on Highway 202. Let's go to Martha in Simpson. Martha, you have a health care-related question for Premier Wall.
Yes. Were you aware that Saskatchewan has the longest wait time to get a cornea transplant done? And the average wait time is about 2 years, and I've waited up to 3 years, and I have had 5 transplants altogether, and 2 of them were in Calgary, and one of them I waited 1 month, and the second one, I waited 2.5 months.
Martha, what's the delay, as has been explained to you, for cornea transplants? Is it the availability of corneas, or what is it?
I've been given different reasons from different people that...
Like, do we have a registry here, for example?
That's what I was going to bring up. There is no national registry, and this is an old number from last year. But here in Saskatchewan, there is 107 people on the waiting list, and at the same time, in Quebec and BC, they threw out 70 corneas.
So, Premier, on the issue of a cornea transplant list. Now, again, I don't know anything about this, but is the corneal transplant issue one that we should look into?
It is, just based on what Martha's just shared with me. We've been able to, as you know, John, make significant progress on orthopedic surgery wait lists in the province by applying some resources, by deploying the private sector in this initiative, and we've seen real results for people with more work to do. So this is a good takeaway for me to find out a little bit about this specific issue and what might be able to be achieved with some innovation. I think it's disturbing that in a province as close as BC, if it's true, if they've been throwing out the transplants themselves, for example, that would be a concern, and it might be a Western Canadian initiative we can look at. But I'll certainly that'll be a good takeaway from today.
All right, Martha, thank you for that. Larry in Saskatoon, you're on with Premier Brad Wall. A question on wildlife near highways.
Mr. Premier, for the past few years, there's been a number of people killed and injured striking moose on the highway, on the roads, down in the South Farmland Zone. The Department of the Environment has allowed what they estimate around 5,000 moose to develop as a population in the farmland area. Because of people raising this issue, myself, John Gormley, and others, the Department of the Environment said they would issue more licenses to reduce the moose population significantly. 2 years later, we find they estimate that there's still approximately 5,000 moose. Hunting and eating the moose can reduce their population, but clearly, to date, they have not taken it seriously.
Larry, I need a question here. We're running short on time.
Yeah. Will you have the Department of the Environment significantly reduce the moose population down?
Thanks, Larry, for the question. Well, in 2012, in part in response to this, to Larry and to your work, John, and to our MLAs who are hearing about it from across the province, the licenses issued to hunters increased 36%, another 27% last year to over 3,800. Here's what we know today. We know that the Environment Ministry reports that moose populations now are stable to slightly lower across the province, particularly in agricultural Saskatchewan, where the liberal quotas, the generous quotas for hunting exist. But I think it's something that we're monitoring because of the efforts of people to draw it to the government's attention, because we're also concerned with the accidents and what's been occurring on Saskatchewan highways. So we have responded in the past, and on a science-based, evidence-based process, we'll respond again if needed.
Premier Brad Wallace here. This is Ask the Premier. Stand by. More calls ahead. Any questions you want to put to the Premier? It's 1-877-332-8255, only on News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. This is Ask the Premier, our monthly checkup with Premier Brad Wall on all things Saskatchewan. 1-877-332-8255. Your questions to the Premier. Okay, that didn't take long. Clearly some people in the Environment Department are listening. Question on the moose reduction efforts, Premier. You have a couple of follow-up bits on licenses.
I do. Thanks, John. On the moose side, we have some updates from, obviously, people in the ministry are listening in terms of increased licenses along Highway 11, in particular in Zone 22. So licenses have gone from 15 to 50, and then for antlerless moose from 11 to 20. That's very, very recently. We also had a call from to 90. 90 on the antlerless moose. Sorry about that. On Highway 202, in that problem area, area. I can tell you there's two solutions the ministry's looked at. The temporary solution, I think, is causing frustration for both the highways ministry and the people out there. It would require 6 to 8 weeks, apparently, of pumping at a significant dollar value. The good news is that we've contracted AECOM to provide the permanent solution. They're working on what the cost of that permanent solution is. Their first recommendation was a little bigger, I think, than what the ministry budgeted, so the consultants are looking at some lower-cost alternatives. However, if there aren't lower-cost alternatives, we're going to have to find the resources necessary to provide that permanent fix. With respect to the cornea transplants, I've found out, as a result of this call from Martha, and I'm grateful for it, we lack the legislative flexibility to do certain things in terms of transplant banks, in terms of a group organization, if you will, of what we're doing with the corneas themselves. There's legislation being prepared for this fall, actually, to address that. So that we would have flexibility, so we can bring innovation to bear and have the corneas available to a greater extent than they are for the transplant. So that hopefully will be good news for Martha.
Martha, thank you for that. And, of course, a couple of quick follow-ups from questions asked this morning of Premier Brad Wall. Caller, stand by. We will get every call on the radio. Premier, on my list, and I wanted to make sure that we got to this issue before too much more time went on, the temporary foreign worker program. The feds, in response to certain high-profile issues in the food sector, essentially hoisted or put a stay on this in the hospitality sector. What are your thoughts on the way the temporary foreign worker program has been used in Saskatchewan?
You know, we need employers, obviously, to putting a priority on Canadians. In our province, there's still a gap. It's closing, but there's a gap between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal unemployment. And so that's always got to be our first priority as Canadians, Saskatchewan people, for these jobs. But we know with about 14,000 jobs right now on saskjobs.ca unfilled, we know with an unemployment rate under 4%, the lowest in the country, that's basically full employment. And we were, in the last job report, we actually created 8,500 jobs year over year while the country was backing up. So we know there is a labor shortage, and we know it's particularly acute in certain sectors of the economy. So there is a role for a program like the Temporary Foreign Workers Program, as long as it is being used as it should be, as long as those who are working in the sectors are not, frankly, being exploited, and as long as they're not Canadians who are available to take those jobs and willing to take those jobs. So, here's a couple of interesting facts for us. About 2% of the workforce would be TFWs in Saskatchewan. Here's another interesting point. Last year, about 55% of all of those classified as temporary foreign workers, and some are students and some are employees, 55% became permanent residents. And that's what we want. So our encouragement to the federal government is, let's make sure we don't pass a policy for Central Canada where they have higher structural unemployment. We need to have some flexibility in the economy. We need employers to be putting a priority on Canadians first. That's non-negotiable. But we also understand that there's a stream to permanent residency for temporary foreign workers that we want to see. Challenge in our country, as you know, John, in Western Canada we have strong economies and a labor shortage. I have been, the province of Saskatchewan has been asking the federal government to look at the employment insurance program, to remove disincentives to mobility so those Canadians from high unemployment areas would have more of an incentive to come to parts of the country that need them in the labor force. And while they made some incremental changes, some marginal changes in the program, we have not seen the kind of changes that would remove those disincentives. So we kind of get it on both sides in the West. We have a tightening up on the immigration side in terms of workforce, but we also have an employment insurance program that still has not addressed the disincentives for people to move from places of high unemployment to where there is work. And so it's an issue. It remains a huge issue. It's why we're going to continue to focus on increased training seats, increasing the number of training seats in the province, and working on trying to address the issue here in Saskatchewan, though we know we'll need others to help.
Premier Brad Wall here. Ask the Premier. Let's get back to the calls. Gord in Tisdale, you're on with the Premier on an education question.
Yeah, my question is regards to the Northeast School Division, who had commissioned a independent third-party report by KPMG to discuss where their central office location should be. Right now there's some inefficiencies in their operation. The study estimated around $270,000 annual reduction in operating costs by locating in Tisdale, of which $87,000 directly is tied to the travel. The school division currently holds about 63 meetings in the fall in Tisdale that's central to the region. Now, there's some capital cost to that as well, which can be disputed in terms of what appropriate or not to spend. My question, I guess, is what is the proper use of the taxpayer money if we're going to ignore the third-party report, which shows significant operational savings?
I appreciate the question. It really sounds like a board issue. I think any government would be really loath to start getting into the issue of where a head office or a board office should be located. In a general sense, we've worked to increase the operating budgets in education well above the rate of inflation. We've increased capital dollars. But, I think we would like, as a province, knowing that there are areas that need new schools, that need where we know the renovation needs are great in terms of existing schools. If we had our druthers, we would like to see to maximize the capital investment in schools. So I wouldn't comment specifically on this issue. I understand it would be a concern to ratepayers there, but it would be something for the board to decide.
Premier Brad Wallace here. Okay, let me, before we get back to the calls, turn to, for politics watchers, a little bit of a discussion on the politics of Saskatchewan and governing. Your party, the Sask Party, has been moving, many would say, and I'm one of them, very early to get your candidates renominated or to get open nominations done. Consequently, quite early on, we're hearing about some pretty well-known, long-established political players who are not running again. Why are you doing this in advance of what we thought was a fall 2015 election, which may well end up being spring 2016? If you could speak to the election timing and why nominations are going on now.
Sure. Well, since I became leader of the party, John, this is a direction that we've taken ahead of every general election. What I mean by that is nominating early, or what some would consider to be very early. So there's nothing new here. There's nothing changed about the set election date. We have it for spring of 2016 as a result of the federal election being in the fall of 2015, their set election date. We've always tried to have candidates on the doorsteps, well in advance, 2 years ahead of the election date. The reason for that, John, is that, first of all, we think that's pretty effective politically, is to be door-knocking, listening to people, listening to what their views are, even as we're thinking about developing a platform for the next election. It also actually helps us in government. That's the second reason. It helps us in government to hear from both existing MLAs, who obviously have the input of their constituents, but it also helps to hear from new candidates who are door-knocking in constituencies, or listening to the voters in terms of their priorities. So I think from a governance perspective, it's helpful, and politically we're organized. We've seen the accuracy of polls in recent provincial elections. I guess we'll check out what happens in Ontario. The best tool in politics is still on the doorsteps and at the farm gates across the province, talking directly to people. So that's why we already have 30 candidates nominated. It's the same approach that we've taken in the last two elections as well, to do this as early as possible. With people announcing or confirming they're not running again, do you do a cabinet shuffle fairly soon? If so, when? Yes, we do. We're going to do that very soon. In weeks, we'll do that. We're very fortunate to have a great caucus, a large group of women and men who are all candidates for both cabinet and other roles that we have, caucus officer positions and committee positions. And I think it's important. I've tried over the years to make sure we were giving new people the chance to move into different roles, and sometimes we ask others to take a break, not because of any issues other than the need to build capacity. So you can expect to see that shortly. Now, the convention, of course, as you notice, when people say, "Look, I'm not running again," they're not necessarily a candidate for cabinet for the next cabinet. That's a convention. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's something that's informing the decision I'm trying to make. Premier Brad Wallace here, back with your calls at 1-877-332-8255. It's Ask the Premier. This is News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. Premier Brad Wallace here. We call this our monthly Ask the Premier session. It's 1-877-332-8255. Okay, calls coming up. Hutterites in rural communities, farming, private liquor stores among them. We will get to your calls. Before I do that, though, Premier, the decision by the province to finance to the tune of $2 million the new Corner Gas movie, $500,000 through Creative Sask, $1.5 through Tourism Sask. How has that been playing, and do you believe it is taxpayers' money well spent? Well, I'll answer the second one first. I do. The $500,000 from Creative Saskatchewan is what this film would be eligible for, or any film, if the Independent Board of Creative Saskatchewan that adjudicates the applications decides that it's eligible. And so Creative Saskatchewan is now what's replaced what used to just be the film tax credit available only for that one sector. Creative Saskatchewan now at $5 million a year funds all of the creative industries, or at least it's available to all of the creative industries. So, that's print, that's live drama, it's film and television, it's also music, which I think in our province may have been ignored over the years in terms of real resources, and we have a great music industry in the province. So that's what Creative Saskatchewan is all about. We also have under tourism, and have for some time, money available for special events that promote the province, special tourism project, marquee events. It's how we were able to fund the Briar, to give them money to bring the Briar here, $1.5 million for just the Junos. That's how much they received because we felt there was a promotional value for the province. The North American Indigenous Games are going to be supported with respect to this as well. The World Juniors got $3.5 million. So under this category, we think the film obviously is very much about Saskatchewan, promotes the province, and we have special agreements in place for them to provide certain special promotions for Saskatchewan over and above the movie, and so it was eligible for 1.5 under that special project's Tourism Saskatchewan funding.
All right, let's get back to calls. Ryan in Rosetown. Ryan, you're on with Premier Wall on an agriculture question.
Hello. I'm just curious when you're going to change the rules surrounding Hutterite colonies, or now they're considered farming companies, and make them pay their own way as far as like health care and dental and whatnot, because right now we pay for their glasses and their dental and stuff, and they're right here beside us. And
aren't Hutterite colonies full of Saskatchewan citizens, Ryan?
No, they're yes, but they're their own group.
Okay, so Premier, is there a question about the financing or the corporate structure of Hutterite colonies that gets asked?
We have no changes planned there in terms of how Hutterite colonies are treated. It obviously would be a federal issue as well, but there's nothing specific the government has planned.
Let's go to Thomas in Regina. Thomas, a question on liquor stores in Saskatchewan.
First of all, I would like to say to the Premier, thank you for a great job that he has done for the province. This province is flourishing. And as a business owner and in the restaurant business, I would like to see the changes in the liquor game pretty fast. The service that we're getting at the local level and the liquor stores is absolutely horrible. And I cannot wait for private liquor stores to open up so we can go and we can get the service that we deserve and perhaps the discounts as well.
Now, Premier, in terms of the way you've been moving on liquor stores, what's the current status, and is there a move to more privately owned liquor stores?
Well, in short, the answer is yes to that. Thanks to Thomas for the call and for the business he operates, the people that he employs. We moved, as you know, John, in a couple of ways. We have increased the number of special vendors. These have existed for decades in the province of Saskatchewan, so that's in smaller rural centers instead of a full-on store, where an existing store of some description is also given or granted the franchise to be the liquor vendor in that area. Now, there are certain liquor stores that just simply were not generating the volume and didn't make sense to continue as a standalone store. And so recently we announced the conversion of some of those stores to private vendors. Additionally, I've announced that we've announced as a government that we will not be building any new liquor stores. The province is growing, and we're grateful for that. The demographics of the cities are changing, and so there is a case for new stores. But we've said where that case can be made, they will not be government stores. We will go through a competitive, transparent process, and the winning bidders, companies, then will be able to put up their new store. That's why you have the new co-op at Blairmore, and Sobeys is involved, and I think that's been well received. But I appreciate the call from Thomas. I don't want to go on too long, John, except to say that you're going to hear a request on my part to our MLAs, and maybe even discussion around the time of a cabinet realignment about our government getting input from Saskatchewan people about what the direction should be here. Should we have more liberalization, more private stores? Because while we campaigned on a certain promise in the last election, we have a chance now to develop a new platform for the next election. And with respect to liquor stores, we want to hear from Saskatchewan people about what that platform might include.
Premier, sounds very interesting. Good having you here, as always, on Ask the Premier. Thanks so much, and we will chat again soon.
John, thanks for your time. Take care.
Premier Brad Wall joining us.